All right, so hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the Canadian Professional Sales Association and Stephen Melanson, President at Melanson Consulting. Today's webinar subject is Verbal Branding and Simplicity, the most powerful hidden tool for today's sales performance. Our webinar host today, Stephen Melanson, is the President of Melanson Consulting, which was founded in 2004. He is a management consultant, trainer, speaker, verbal branding expert, and, as featured on Forbes.com, originator of the only differentiation and business simplicity platform of its kind worldwide. Please note that all of today's attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of this webinar, and that you may ask questions at the end of the webinar using the question function in your GoToWebinar dashboard. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Stephen to start.
Thank you so much, Rupal, and hello to everyone in Canada, I assume, and maybe elsewhere. I'm really excited to talk to everybody today. What I can promise you is I'm going to try to teach you as much as I can over the next little while. And I also promise that the time will go by fast because I have a lot to cover. So if you indulge me, I'm going to go through several layers of what verbal branding and simplicity, what I call simplicity modeling at times, what it really is, what it's used for, and of course we need to talk about performance and sales, and we're going to go into things like unity of culture and teamwork and a few things like that and more. So I'm glad you could join me today. As Rupalin said, if you wouldn't mind saving questions for the end, because I want to cover the material and make sure we have time for that. Before I forget, I also want to thank Jeff Goldstein. I'm not sure if he's with us today, but he's the person that introduced me to CPSA and Rupalin, so I thank him if he's around. So let's get started. And you know, performance is everything, right? What I'm always interested in is what's the performance, and is there a way that there can be something I would think of as performance glue inside any type or any size of information. And this is all the way from the new hire and entry level people, all the way through all of management and operations, all the way up to the person at the top. What's the glue that keeps everyone together and on the same page? So I'm going to show you modeling that will help to do that, and definitely helps. And you know, the mindset collectively is very, very important, but we never forget the individual as well, because that's where the sales come from. So, you know, I'm not really shy about certain things. I like to think big. I like to think about things having to do with how could you somehow never lose a deal that you wanted, that you felt was a good fit? We all know sales is a numbers game to some degree, but I don't really like that metric. I like the metric of how do we never lose a deal that we want, that we think is a good fit for ourselves or our firm. And how do we literally get everybody in an organization, be it 10 people or 5 or 100,000, how do we get everybody on the same page? What would you really have to do that? So I'm going to show you my version for those things. And we do have a basic called verbal branding. The very most basic thing that I do and teach is called verbal branding and help develop. It's called verbal branding. And it's really a spoken application in the branding world, which I guess is unique anywhere. Because when I first got into the branding world, the thing I noticed immediately was it seemed to cover everything except for when people spoke. And being a sales guy from way back myself, I noticed it immediately and I thought it had to be solved. Now, the way you should think of this, what verbal branding really is, it's like the secret sauce of these things and more, but at minimum, how do you actually differentiate from your competition in the marketplace? How do you get everybody on the same page? And how do you actually use simplicity itself as a business tool? So that's the backdrop of everything we're going to talk about. And the simplicity as a tool is huge, and I'm going to show you why that's a driving factor. Now, I always love to start with a tip. Just to get us started, this is a little different than some of the things you may have heard before, but I'm compelled to start with a tip to set us off in the right direction. And you know, when you're networking, say, and you go into a room and you meet somebody that you don't know, and the most common thing that happens is people say, what do you do? Most common thing in the world, right? So when you're asked that, and you tell someone your name and the name of your firm, and then you tell them what category of business that you're in, and by that I mean manufacturing firm, consulting firm, technology, CPA, anything at all, The tip is this: nobody cares. So if we were all together in the same room, a few of you would laugh, a few of you might wonder where I'm going with all this, but there's a moment of levity, but I'm actually making a very serious point. Nobody cares what you and I do for a living. They really, really don't. They want to know what's in it for them. So if you think about it, what people really do is they describe themselves and they go over the profile of their company, or they describe the category itself and what amounts to the positive attributes of the category, and they never differentiate at all. In essence, saying the same things that their competitors can and do say. So that's a problem, and I want to come right out of the gate and start you with a mindset that nobody cares what you and I do. They want to know what's in it for them, and that should be where we begin our thought process. What's in it for them? So I'm going to talk about the basics of verbal branding and simplicity. So I'm going to show you a model right now. And some of the basics are these. Now, branding is a humongous topic. There's all sorts of things that go on with branding, all of which are important. But what I like for you to think about is there's two big buckets in the branding world to simplify it. One is the identity elements. Those are things like logos and taglines and jingles and get-goes and just do it's and things like that. That's all on the identity side. But what should come first, and what I think is actually more important, is what's called positioning. And what you see in front of you is literally the definition I've had for almost 20 years now. How are you different and better than the competition? You have to know that. And the you can be yourself, it can be a product, it can be the firm, but how are you in fact different, and because of that difference, a better option than the competition? Now, because we're doing this thing called verbal branding, that means it has to do with when people speak and all these interactions we all have every day. So these are a couple of the most important dynamics that go on when people actually speak to each other. And you'll see I put a little star next to memory. So memory literally could be the most important thing that I ever talk about, believe it or not. So here's the thing about it, and no pun intended, but I want you to remember this for the rest of your business and/or entire life. People will never remember more than maybe one or two things about you, if they even remember that. So the way to think of this is, when you talk to someone today, even if you talk to them for an hour or have a long capability meeting, human beings are literally not capable, scientifically, cognitively, of remembering more than a couple things a day and a week later. And that's a reality that we have to deal with. So our modeling, as you'll see, deals directly with this. But this bit of information, in fact, if you really truly understood the implications of this and this alone, I could stop this meeting right now, this presentation, and it would and could and should change the way you interact with people forever. It's not what's happening right now, it's what someone will absorb and remember a day and a week and maybe even a month later. That's where the rubber hits the road. Now, curiosity, I add this because that's an important dynamic and it's an important bit of evidence for whether you have good positioning or not. So we've said you need to know why you're different and better than the competition. Once you've developed that, when you tell someone that, the best bit of evidence I've ever seen is whether they become curious to hear more or not. So especially in a verbal interaction, when someone leans in and they say, hey, what do you mean by that? Or that's interesting, tell me more. That's good evidence that your positioning is interesting and probably valuable to that person. At minimum, it's interesting to them. If you get the blank stare and they act like they want to walk away, that's evidence too. So curiosity is a good bit of evidence of whether your differentiation and positioning is working. Now, here's this model. Here's the nuts and bolts. It's like a pyramid. So follow this. This pyramid shape, just a triangle, is a set of logic that I'm going to show you. And at the moment, the way to think of it is it's both every single thing about you. And remember, when I use the word you, it could be whatever the thing that's being offered and sold. So it could be you, could be the product, could be the firm, but every single thing about you, most important info goes at the tip, and it works logically down to the bottom to the least important information. It's also a conversation of any length. Most important information at the tip, logically down to the bottom to the least important information. That's what that shape represents. And believe it or not, I would love it if you only thought of this from now on when you consider all your communications across all your channels. Most important information at the tip of the pyramid. Let me show you what I mean by all this. Remember what I said about the category of your business. It's always there. People do need to know what you do for a living, but it hovers in the background because that's not what you want people to care about. You're in charge of this. So because of the memory thing and people's ability to absorb information, we can never ever have more than one or two very brief concepts at the tip of this pyramid. Now, here's the trick. If you can't say it in 5 seconds, then it isn't right yet. It's not verbal branding. So the most basic rules I use are these: one or two concepts, never ever more than that. And if you can't say it in plain language in 5 seconds or less, it isn't verbal branding, and it will not work as well. Now, what you might be thinking already is, what about this thing called an elevator pitch? Now, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Some people teach it. Some people have been working on theirs for 20, 30 years, but I'm here to tell you the elevator pitch is not just not my favorite thing. I'm going to tell you to forget about that forever. The normal is 30 seconds. That is way, way too long. You cannot introduce yourself for 30 seconds under most scenarios and get away with it. People get bored. It turns into white noise. They roll their eyes. You've probably noticed. Now, what I'm going to give you as a bit of a tool right now is this thing I call the crazy tests. So let's follow the logic again so far. If you tell someone what category of business that you're in, and you have this idea in mind that you have to use one or two concepts, those should represent why someone would be crazy to not use you, to not buy from you, to not partner with you, to not network with you, whatever it is that you want. So if I'm a branding consultant, which is what I actually am, and by the way, I never mentioned that, but if that's what I am from a category standpoint, at the tip of the pyramid for me is I do verbal branding and simplicity work. Two concepts takes me about 1 second to say. That's why someone would be crazy to not work with me or notice me or care about me or buy from me or network with me, anything I want. So I know the answer to that. The question is, do you? Have you developed that yet? Maybe not, but I'm telling you the elevator pitch is a non-starter. Forget it. There are times when you might need to speak for 30 seconds, but it should still follow this logic. So the logic, again, will go like this. One or two concepts at the tip, somebody gets curious, or you need to fill in a little bit more time. What's the next level of detail? Add one more level of detail describing what's at the tip of the pyramid. So you're still talking about that. And the longer meeting, this might not surprise you based on what I'm saying so far, but you could have a 1 or 2 hours capability meeting, and there's a couple things you need to know. If you don't stay on brand, then lots of things that you say will turn into white noise. So the way I view this is the 1 or 2 concepts at the tip of this pyramid that you could say on a moment's notice very rapidly, that should be all you ever talk about, but you describe it and detail it at deeper and deeper levels of detail. So even if you have a 2-hour capability meeting, you're really only talking about why you're different and better and continuing to describe it at deeper and deeper levels of detail, telling stories about it, et cetera, et cetera. So that encounter and that set of data is the entirety of how you should communicate with your audience, all based on why you're different and better than the competition. Now, here's another thing. I tell you, I get a lot of feedback on this. One of the things I get the most feedback on, probably the most, is the elevator pitch thing. But what probably comes in second is this. Now, what you see in front of you is I've highlighted everything other than the 1 or 2 concepts that will represent why is somebody crazy to not use you, things like that, your different and better concepts. So I call this the 95% rule. That means that 95%, now listen to this, 95% of what you do, your competitors also do. So I speak about it this way, 95% of people and companies do 95% the exact same thing as their competition. And trust me, that is not a criticism, it just is what it is. Unless you've invented something, which is usually technology based, unless you've invented something, this will mainly hold true that almost everything everyone does is the same, or they'd be in a different category. So we need to know that going in to any conversation. And by the way, I call it the of course category, which is the way that you can use this starting today. If asked a question about whether you do this or that has to do with the 95%, all that data, your answer in theory and maybe even literally can be, of course we do that, but so does everyone else in our line of business. That's why I want to direct your attention to the one or two things that really are at the tip of the pyramid. And this is not the way you actually speak to people, but you have to know the logic of things. If someone asked me if I train salespeople, my answer would be, of course I do. But the reason mine's different and I believe better is because I do verbal branding and simplicity work around selling. So if you follow that logic, that's usable for you literally today, even if you have not figured out your differentiation. Now, this branding logic, just real quick, just to support and buttress everything we've talked about so far. There's the one or two concepts at the tip of the pyramid. There's the next level of detail that in theory answers curiosity from the marketplace. And then there's a bunch of data, and that's the commoditized part. So it goes like this. The positioned offer, that's your differentiation of value. Answer curiosity, and everything else you should assume is commoditized, because whether you believe it is or not, trust me, the marketplace thinks it's commoditized. It's all the same to them. They do not have the attention span that we want by any stretch of the imagination. So we need to know that people's capability, and even the entire marketplace, the capability there is to embed maybe one or two ideas at most. And to tell you the truth, what's much more common is that people and markets don't remember anything other than what you do for a living, the category, and that's a branding loss. So we aim to avoid that. Now, again, if we were all in the same room together, I'd ask this question and someone would answer me with something like 5 or 10,000. So, the question is, how many business conversations have you had in your life? And very legitimately, somebody might say 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 or 20. Just depends on how long they've been around, frankly. But from a branding perspective, there's only 2. This is what goes on in the mind of the consumer. You and I are either the same as everybody else or we're different. 99% of the time, people walk away from interactions and they're basically, whether articulated this way or not, basically saying to themselves, that sounded fine, but it's kind of the same as everything else I've heard. Or they walk away saying, that was interesting, that was different. That's where you need to be as long as it's valuable. So I've got some scary news for you. Some of you might be familiar with things like this, but there's research. So everything I've talked about, by the way, there's data and science and research behind it. But here's another thing that there's really quite a lot of data around. Do you know how long it takes a person to start deciding whether they trust you when you meet them or you talk to them, especially when you meet them live? 1/10 of 1 second. Isn't that incredible? There's a reason I have the rules that I do. You do not have the luxury of time on your side. People start deciding things immediately. And the worst thing is a website, by the way, and marketing materials. People, when they open a website, it's something like 1/20th of a second that their brain starts computing what their opinion is. So it starts happening instantaneously, and we have to know that in order to message correctly. Do you know how long it takes someone to start deciding what they think of you in general? Less than 1 second. So this is good and bad news. The bad news is it's all true. The good news is if we know it, we can try to adjust and make sure we're getting people's attention really fast. Okay, you want to network better? We're still on the same track. Simplicity is the driver. 1 or 2 concepts, hopefully differentiating in a valuable way, as valuable as possible. And if we're going to talk about sales, right? You guys are here because of your association to CPSA. Sales is the game, directly or indirectly, that we're talking about. Networking is intimate to good selling and growth. So if you want to do better networking, follow the rules that I've put out so far, and let's paint the picture. There's you, and I do mean you, you listening to me now, and you have networking partners. Let's say one of them is me. Here's the real test of your messaging, or one really good test. What would I say to someone else in my network about you when you're not there? Have you armed me with something simple and valuable enough beyond your category, or that positions you in your category, so that I could say it to someone else when you're not there? Because if I don't do that, if I'm not capable of doing that, what if that prospect was the most important person that you might have met all year? And all I did was say, well, that person's, they're a CPA firm, or they're a legal firm. Just the category. That person will walk away saying, I know a million already. Why would I want to get in touch with that person? As good as Stephen makes them sound. They will not be motivated. The motivation will come from valuable differentiation. And if it's not simple, this dynamic as well as others will not work. So you can expand your network by doing what I'm talking about so far, and you will get calls based on something that's differentiated and valuable sounding, and your network will expand and you will grow faster based on things like that. Now let's stop for a moment. I want to make sure something is very, very clear. We are talking about branding from a positioning and an offer standpoint. This is an important word. This is not sloganizing. It is not contrived language. It is not jargon. It is not a jingle. This is what you are actually offering the marketplace of differentiated value. The reason I use this word is because an offer is something that you actually have to deliver. It's not a throwaway line. What are you actually going to do? What are you actually offering to do and have happen to them? That's what we're talking about. If it was something different, it wouldn't be verbal branding. So your consideration as it stands now is simplicity, the model that we've talked about and the structure of it and the logic, and making sure it's something that you're actually offering the marketplace, and it is not an identity element of your brand. It is the positioned offer of your brand. Here's a couple of ways to not do it. So Fidelity came out. This is actually a little bit older now, but I still like the example because this did what I thought it would do, which is it went away. They were saying turn here for a while. So think about my crazy test, if you will. Why would somebody go over and talk to somebody at Fidelity? Why would somebody be crazy not to? Is the answer to that turn here? Absolutely not. It's a non sequitur. It doesn't even make sense. And by the way, they would never say that if you asked them. Here's another one. So we say no to that. BlackBerry. BlackBerry might be forever one of the great examples of missed opportunity. So BlackBerry could have owned security for mobile phones, period, maybe forever. But somebody over there had too much time on their hands, quite frankly, and they started thinking of all sorts of things to try to attract a new audience. Maybe, I really don't know, but they started advertising with things like be bold and love what you do. And I want to know what that has to do with the security on my phone. So why would somebody be crazy at the time to not use a BlackBerry phone? Is the answer be bold and love what you do? Absolutely not. There's a reason that those marketing campaigns did not work. And frankly, I don't know what to say about, they could have owned it and been the single player in many regards, or at least an equal player, and they aren't, and they didn't do a good enough job. So I think these are some of the things we can judge whether the mindset is correct about what branding really ought to do and what it should accomplish in the marketplace. Now we're going to say no to that one too. So here's a couple that actually are more similar to what I would be talking about. So TD Bank, America's most convenient bank, we hear that a lot around here. So convenient is something to offer. It exists, it has to be fulfilled and executed. So this would be more along the lines, right now we're talking about examples that people might know from the marketplace. America's most convenient bank, so the positioning comment there is convenience. And they, in fact, deliver on that. They win customer service awards all the time. And the reason is because they've executed on something that can be executed on, that they're offering the marketplace, which is convenience. They have different hours, they're open on the weekend, they bring an umbrella if it's raining, or give you one and run out to your car, things like that and more. Now, the gold standard has always been, and probably will always be, Volvo and safety. They own that concept in their marketplace, period. Simple, simple, simple. Conversational. Could they answer the question, why would somebody be crazy to not buy a Volvo? Yes. They would say because and the truth is they're not even the safest cars anymore, but they still own that concept because of how safe their cars are. Why would somebody be crazy to not go over to TD Bank, America's most convenient bank? Because of the convenience factor. They have an answer for it, and they execute on it. So we're going to give that a check. That's more along the lines, and I hope you see the difference between something that's a slogan, sort of the jargon, creativity beyond what we want, contrived even, and an actual offer to the marketplace. So, we have a situation where we need to use time effectively. And one of the things I always make sure that I teach and talk about is how to use time. So, sales is a very particular thing. I'm a sales guy. I've always been a sales guy. And one of the things we have to be very protective of is how much time we take with certain instances. And qualifying is absolutely critical. I know this is nothing new to you, but I just want to paint the picture a little bit based on what we're talking about. Simplicity is in the background. You have to use it as a business tool. And when it comes to qualifying situations, my advice to you is to make sure people are very rapidly, not unprofessionally, but very rapidly in the position of saying yes or no to you of whether they're interested in what you're offering. So it's a little risky, but it's worth it because you need a good pipeline. So the old traditional method is what I literally call chase and beg. Anybody can sell anything to anybody if they do a good enough job. Well, frankly, there's too much competition right now in the world. It's never going to change, I don't think. There's way too much competition to chase and beg people to buy from you. You need to know, based on your differentiated value, whether people are truly interested. Is there a good fit? Yes or no? Now, I'm exaggerating, but that should be the tone of your thought process and, frankly, to some degree at least, the tone of your conversations. I need to know if people are interested in verbal branding and simplicity right away, whether they deserve a spot in my pipeline or not. So if the old is, we might loosely call chase and beg, takes too long, the new is going to cut that shorter based on your positioned value. So sooner you're going to get a yes or a no or something close, and you'll know how to deal with it in terms of your pipeline. So we now have unused time. This is all time that's taken. So instead of that one old version and chase that person maybe for months and years even sometimes to never quite get an answer, we're going to take less time and get an answer. And instead, we're going to put more good fit prospects in our pipeline. They at minimum should be able to say, yes, they're interested based on hearing what in the world you're talking about once you get to that point. But it's all led by that tip of pyramid, getting attention from your differentiated value. Frankly, a lot of people and a lot of firms do it from the bottom up and take way too much time and kind of enter that white noise phase almost unwittingly, and we don't want that. We need people to know what our value is immediately. They don't have time or the inclination. So we're talking about qualifying, and it would go just like this. Let them know what category business you're in. You're different because, and that's points right at the tip of the pyramid, and are they interested or not? Now, I'm not saying to do this like this, but this is a mindset of getting to that yes or no moment sooner. Salespeople need that for performance and their growth. Now, I'm very direct about this. I'm not shy. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen evidence. And frankly, the marketplace gives me evidence from white papers and data anyway. But I am here to say this. The tip of the pyramid, if you cannot do that, it does not mean you're going out of business. It doesn't even mean that you're not doing well. But I am here to tell you that you are losing money every day in a very true sense without the ability to position and differentiate and use simplicity as the driver, as I've showed you. So that's good and bad news too. It's not easy to develop the ideas that belong at the leading edge, as I've shown you, but it is absolutely worth it for you to differentiate, have a brand that makes sense and is truly valuable, and to sell more. So I might start going a little bit faster, but I wanted to make sure that you had the basics and the philosophy and the model before I sped it up a little bit, because there's other layers to this. I promised you I would go over as much as I could, and selling is the thing that has to happen. Nothing happens until something's sold, but there's more going on in business, of course. So I want to talk quickly about a unified and what I call a connected culture. So here's how to model that up. There's the brand itself, and then there's the individuals that work in a firm, in any kind of business. And my suggestion is that you go, once you've developed your positioning and that sort of pyramid logic, the person per person ought to know these things. And this is further development, but it's worth it as well to get everybody on the same page. This is 100% a performance issue to have everyone on the same page in your firm. How does that individual operationalize the brand? So as I said, Volvo is the easiest one. It's the most famous one. Everybody knows that safety is their thing. So when somebody shows up to work, how does that person operationalize safety in their role? And then further, how does that person add value to, in Volvo's case, safety? How do they personally add value to it? They have their role, they have their skill set and their expertise, and lots of things that go into why they were hired and what they fulfill every day. Well, how do they add value? So our two examples again, how would that work for TD Bank and convenience? How would that work for Volvo and safety? So we have our pyramid, it still works. This logic is agnostic. It works for whatever you want it to work for. So you have your differentiated positioning, then you have the individual. How do I add value to that positioning? Not to the category, but to the positioning itself. And you just model that down 1 or 2 seconds. Don't forget, this is language and a leading edge of information from a branding standpoint that a person should be able to say inside of 5 seconds using 1 or 2 concepts and never more. And then they start to understand how they add value to it. Maybe it's the reason they were hired in the first place. All the way through, it could be 5 people, 10 people, 100,000 people, it doesn't matter. Simplicity is a business tool. It should be seen as one, and it is a game changer. And I'm going to show you just this sort of concept of how this works inside out. Once those concepts are developed, and what I mean by that is the 1 or 2 concepts that you're going to use, they do simultaneous things. Externally, it's for differentiation and sales and growth. And if you notice, I put confidence at the bottom there. Growth, sales, networking, marketing, and confidence. Confidence is a beautiful thing. Confidence is one of the things that comes out of simplicity, by the way. It works in both directions. Simplicity will allow someone to be confident, and they will show confidence by using simplicity, especially out in the marketplace. But now, based on the same 1 or 2 ideas, we drag those ideas back into the internal culture. And I call it a connected culture, by the way, when everybody's literally on the same page. It's a very elusive thing, but to the degree that it can be done, it's absolutely a competitive advantage. So connected culture, leadership, operations, and again, it's a business tool that should be used as the simplicity factor. So the same concepts are being used, 1 or 2 that can be said in 5 seconds or less. Growth and culture. It goes out to the market and into the culture. So what do you need to perform better in your situation? Everyone needs their sales to be better and better and better. I've showed you a way to do it that seems to be, quite frankly, one of the, if not the best way to do it. It doesn't mean you throw away your tactics, by the way. The finding pain, the listening, the relationship building, all the things that are tactical, but it does put a strategy around it for selling. This is the strategic part of selling. The positioning is strategic in nature. So sales, I think, should be obvious, but what do you need other than that, maybe, to perform better? The model can be used for all of it. Let's say it's leadership alignment. Let's say it is culture. Let's say it's cross-departmental teamwork. Let's say it's communications among the middle managers. Think of anything that could and should be improved on performance-wise, and I'll stand by the model in terms of that the simplicity can be used to improve the performance of it. And it all starts with this. I call it the hallway test, by the way. The hallway tests. What that means is you or anyone could run around down the hallway at your firm and pull people aside one at a time. This is post-development, by the way. Why are we, just say to somebody, hey, by the way, why are we different than anybody else in our marketplace? They should be able to answer quickly and immediately with one or two concepts. Then you go grab somebody else individually 15 minutes later. Why would anybody be crazy to not work with us? Tell me right now. They should have basically the same answer. What's the criteria we use to make decisions? They should have the same answer. I could do 20 questions and the answer should more or less be the same because that's what branding ought to do. But now we're talking about what's called verbal branding. And by the way, have you ever run across this? The Ritz-Carlton, one of the most famous hotel chains in the world. Did you know that their internal mantra is this? We are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And they call it anticipatory service provided by all staff members. The story I've heard about that, and this exemplifies it, is a business person showed up at a Ritz-Carlton. Somehow, some way, they forgot their shoes, their business shoes, for a meeting that was bright and early the next day. What did the staff member do at Ritz-Carlton? They took their size, asked them what color they needed, and they went down and bought them some shoes at a shop nearby. That's the staff member being a lady or gentleman serving ladies and gentlemen. So that's their internal mantra, and it drives everything they do. If you ask somebody that works at Ritz-Carlton, if they've been there more than a day, or maybe even on the first day, they'll tell you that's what they live their life to do. We're ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. That's an example of the internal driver of culture. Now, the new landscape for people that sell and to be productive and performance-based is that you need to offer strategic value, or, and I'm being very honest, as time goes on, I think you'll be able to relate to this, I think. If you're not adding what I would call strategic value, you may be replaceable now or in the future. So what do I mean by this? So, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of players in every marketplace. And if you're not differentiated, first off, you have a hard time getting noticed and growing fast enough. You end up fighting it out on price if you notice. That's one of the leading indicators. If you're fighting it out on price, that means your brand needs to be kind of redone and redeveloped. But we don't want robots replacing us someday. Certain certain environments, the robots are coming, right? So even if that's not the case, we still need to be strategic. So here's what I mean. The old is product, services, and rates. The new is strategic impact. And what we mean is whatever your category of business is, what do you do that goes beyond it? Beyond it. And that would be recognized as such by the consuming audience. Do you offer insight into their ability to succeed? Not just do good work, but what's your insight that you might provide that will impact them and their business in total? Do you have the ability to talk to your clients about what's coming next in the marketplace so that they can plan? See, that's beyond category in most instances. Do you help them make decisions at the highest level? Do you literally help them succeed in their mission and vision? Do you do that? What's the impact beyond your category? And as you can tell, I'm very direct about certain things, so I'll say this as well. It's literally a disservice to both yourself and your client to not know this information. So we're talking about a bunch of things all at once. Foremost is how to sell, but it really has to do with your value to your clients. What will be the performance factor that your offer represents, and what impact do you really have? I don't mean this to be pejorative in any way, but if you only do good work, that's no longer good enough. You have to have extended value and maybe even game-changing value to your clients at certain times. And by the way, the easiest example that everybody I think will know is in the accounting world, the CPA world. If you notice, every firm or almost every firm really has for a while now had advisory services. And there's a simple reason for that. They have to. They don't have a choice. If all they do is add up the numbers well and be responsive, as important as that is, and even on the relationship level, if all they do is good work, it's not good enough anymore, and that's been recognized for quite some time. They all have advisory services or are developing advisory services to have a higher extended value to their clients. They have to do it because of the competition. So simplicity is an impact multiplier. If we take our model and we morph it, I'll just show you this real quick. We're getting to the end, and then we'll be able to do a question or two or three. Is if you take my model and you say, there's that circle in the middle there, that's the one or two concepts that I've been talking about the whole time, that leading edge that differentiate you. So what do we do with this big picture? Well, we sell with it. We formulate culture and operations. This is all simultaneously, by the way. This is why it's called branding in my mind. If it doesn't do this, it wouldn't be branding to the way I think. You sell with it. Simultaneously, you build culture and operations around it. Management uses it at the highest levels or middle management level to make decisions. And because of the simplicity factor, this is why it's very much a performance thing, is you can do everything faster because the simplicity is there. It's being used as a business tool. Execution is faster, decisions are faster, there's no lack of clarity. But I will tell you that what I really mean by all this is per individual and then collectively, what we want is everyone to be able to think and speak correctly about the brand and the value. What is it? What does it mean to others? And the ability to think and speak, the truth is, it's impossible to argue against that that's what comes first. Everything comes from inside our brains, and then with the ability to have it come out of our mouth when we're speaking is the beginning of everything. Sales, culture, leadership, operations, everything you can think of. By the way, this is also used to attract and retain talent. Same concept because the brand is so strong. So if we can think and speak correctly, that means we can act and react accordingly every single day per individual and then collectively. So the simplicity path is think and speak, get everybody on the same page, then everybody can act and react according to the brand. This is the development to be done that you should think about starting today, I hope. Get everybody on the same page, that's the education part, and the performance part is acting and reacting accordingly every single day. And just to put added pressure on leadership, leadership owns the think and speak part. If they don't do the job correctly in all candor, then this will not come together. So as I've said, this isn't just me. I mean, this is my business and I know what I know, but there's also evidence out in the marketplace. And Siegel and Gale happens to put out a simplicity index every year where they measure brands and the simplicity factor, literally, and the performance thereof. So simplicity since 2009, well, here's what's happened in various marketplaces and across all of business, that their simplicity, the global top 10 beat the indexes by that percent. That's incredible, 679%, amazing. Consumers will also recommend a brand based on if it's simple or not. 64% of the time, they will more likely and sooner recommend a brand based on simplicity alone. And they pay more. They pay more. So when you're fighting it out on price, if you are, your brand needs to be redeveloped, not just because of the fact of it, but because you'll have margin there. Got to get out of the game of fighting it out on price. That's a branding issue, not a sales issue. So my goal is to obliterate the competition. So you have to shoot high. What ideas would you have to put in place to never lose a deal, to obliterate the competition? If you don't shoot for that, then you might underperform. You probably will, actually. And the first targets, as I've said, are the actual sales function, both what's said, but also the operational and teamwork part and being on the same page. And then the bigger picture is culture in general. That's the being on the same page part. So I'm almost done, and then we'll open it up for questions. So how good are you in math? Well, I have good news for you. Much like myself, some of you or many of you are probably not good in math at all. There's a reason I do verbal branding and sales and all this stuff. I'm not good in math, or I'd probably be something else in life. But I have the easiest thing in the world, and this is more directed towards sales. but the easiest thing you'll ever see that I really want you to absorb and think about. So my math equation, the one that I use for selling, is differentiation times simplicity equals performance of selling. Now, the reason I use this math equation is I don't want you to think that you need A++ differentiation to succeed with this model. In fact, the model accounts for you not needing it, but you do need at least a B-. So you've got to work at it. You've got to figure out, why are we different and better? What's the differentiated and positioned value we can offer the marketplace? And frankly, even if you get a B-, because it has to be real, you can't fake it. It has to be a real thing that you can offer. But if you get at least a B- and then times simplicity, simplicity is an impact multiplier. Differentiation times simplicity will equal the performance that you get. So my favorite quote for many, many years, I've resurrected it recently, is this. Patrick Lencioni, he's the guy that wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. If you can get all the people in an organization rowing in the same direction, dominate any industry and any market against any competition at any time. And as I've said, I'm fairly blunt about certain things. I defy anyone to try to get any number of people in an organization rowing in the same direction if they do not know how to use and apply simplicity as a business tool. That's what we're talking about today. So your homework is to form a team. I hope you do this today or tomorrow, or start thinking about it immediately. Who can be on a team that can work on this model with a leading edge of 1 or 2 differentiating factors that can be said in plain language? Who's on the team? When are you going to start? So you got to identify the differentiation, and then you got to figure out how you're going to educate people so you can get everybody on the same page. This model impacts everyone in the organization regardless of their role, and it's for a very, very good reason, because it works and because it's basically ends up being who you are in the market. Do not commoditize yourself. Do not trick yourself into thinking more data is better than less in this branding world. People will not absorb it. They have too much coming at them, and they don't care enough. The way to make them care is by doing what I've showed you. Have an interesting, curiosity-inducing, differentiated brand. Offer that immediately, sell it, and operationalize it, and form leadership decision-making around it for performance. So we're going to open it up, Rupalin, for questions. Thank you for indulging me as I went through all that. I wanted to make sure I gave you everything I could in this amount of time. Please get in touch with me. I have something for you if you wish, but you got to get in touch with me. By June 5, I have a little program that I offer sometimes. It's a bit of a micro launch. And this is my way of helping to get you started, and we can talk about what options there are for that. And these days we would do it probably on a Zoom call or a webinar or on GoToMeeting. But there's my contact information. Please take a picture of it. Get in touch with me anytime you want. If you want to talk to me about the micro launch, please do. And Rupalin, if you can hear me still, I wonder if a question or two has come in. If not, we can go to your final slide.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you so much for all of this insight and for, of course, providing your contact information for that slide. I'm sure that'll be really, really valuable for everyone. We do have a few people asking whether or not the presentation will be provided after the webinar. Yes, for all of you asking, the webinar has been recorded, and the webinar link will be emailed to all of our attendees after the webinar. We do have a couple questions here, Stephen.
Okay.
Here's a good one. When a customer is dissatisfied with your order fill levels and makes a joke about your company's slogan, how would you react? What would you say?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Whoever asked that question, I want to commend them on asking me a very unique question. I don't think I've ever been asked something quite like that before. But I love the idea of being objective and of being curious. And this is sort of a business thing, but it's a life thing too, I guess. Is, just be curious. What my response would be, oh, what don't you like about it? And I mean, one wonders what the person would say, but you obviously know You know, and if I go back to one of the things I was talking about, that's evidence. Now, if that's the only person that ever made fun of a slogan, then that's evidence that it's an outlier. But if you feel like there's not a productivity about what the slogan is, if it doesn't seem to be working, you know, I just believe in what works. I'm agnostic to what works. So whether it's positioning or slogans or differentiation or the colors on a website or the fonts used or, you know, the gecko or the just do it, anything at all, the only question is, does it work? So my mind would be firing off immediately. What does this mean? Is this part of a pattern of evidence? And I would always tend to just try to not have my feelings hurt and just say, well, what do you mean? What don't you like about it? And have them explain. And you never know what information you're going to get. And frankly, you know, so this, and just quickly, this also presupposes that research wasn't done previous to a slogan or a logo or anything at all being set out to the public. So that research has to be done initially before it's launched. But if there's a ton of research and it's working really well and agreed upon by leadership and the community of everyone within an organization, and then somebody comes by and is a wise guy, I would not pay too close attention to that based on what evidence I had already. But if it's a pattern on the negative side, I would pay attention to that too. But I'd always ask them what they meant and let them explain themselves.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Really good answer. So we have someone asking about the Simplicity logo that you have up on the top left-hand corner. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit and tell us what the brand is all about?
Sure, it's an easy story. So that I Googled simplicity and Chinese symbols because I just like them. And I was really just playing around one day, this is a few years ago, and that symbol, in fact, the word simplicity there was part of the result. And I just decided to use it on my business cards, on my website. And I just like the visual of it. So speaking of visuals, and this is an identity element, so it's very much what we've been talking about. There's identity elements, and mine means simplicity. Why do I want that? I would think it would be obvious, right? Because I'm the guy that does verbal branding and simplicity work. So that's a branding icon and an identity element that literally means simplicity, but I happen to like the visual of Chinese symbols, and I get comments on it all the time. And it's not that it's the most important thing on that level, but it is noticeable and people ask me about it, so maybe it is an important thing. But it means simplicity and it's a Chinese symbol.
Thank you, Stephen. You've answered everything so far, but we do have a couple more minutes. So if anyone wants to enter an additional question, we've got a couple minutes. Here's another one for us, Stephen. It's a little bit longer. When you have identified your differentiation, gone out and acquired your A team and started rowing in the same direction as a team operationally and sales development together, but then following the immediate vast growth, you start to experience separation of the departments due to cost reductions. What is the best simplicity to approach the upper management team to attempt to reunify the company?
Okay, so there's two parts. I'll try to answer this in a short form. First of all, there's also data and research done on how, and frankly, because of the COVID-19 situation, this is very prevalent, is everyone's talking about how to pivot, which is a little bit similar to what's being asked. One circumstance that requires pivoting is downsizing, you know, lots of things, but that's one of them. And the COVID-19 situation, you need to pivot. So my answer is this: if in fact a simplicity modeling has been implemented prior to those changes being needed, the changes themselves and the realignment will be easier because you've already got people on the same page rather than a chaotic situation. Now, part of what it seemed was being asked was, what about I'm not sure if I heard this correctly, Rupalin, but there seemed to be a bit in there about cross-departmental teamwork and the leadership alignment. you know, so what's coming next in the marketplace, or what's coming next from a success and operational standpoint, whatever that target ends up being, you just apply the simplicity rules both to develop it and then also to execute on it. This is a deep dive question, but the two answers are, if simplicity is already there, the pivot will be easier. And in terms of executing post decision making and pivoting to something or some direction that's new, apply the same rules that we've already set out. Leadership owns simplicity or lack thereof at any firm of any size, of any kind. So it's on their plate to execute on this.
Thanks so much, Stephen. You've answered all of the questions that have been submitted. So thank you so much to everyone who has joined today's webinar, and of course to Stephen for presenting today. I would like to take a moment to share our next online public webinar, which is up on the screen now. We do have a webinar hosted in partnership with BrokerLink Insurance and Quartet Service on June 11th called Top Cybersecurity Mistakes Sales Pros Make While Working Remotely, which most of us are facing today. So in the upcoming webinar, attendees will get a detailed overview of our top cybersecurity risks, and specifically for sales professionals and the steps that you can take to prepare yourself and your sales team. So of course, for everyone asking about the webinar recording for today, I will send that over to all of the attendees today. And for all of the webinars and member exclusive virtual training sessions, please go over to cpsa.com/calendar and you will find them listed there for registration. So everyone, thank you for your participation today. And of course, Stephen, thank you so much again.
You're welcome.
Have a great day, everyone. Talk soon.